So, as an update from last week, when I was talking about Marvel Comics and their promotion where when you buy a physical copy of a comic, they give you the digital version of the same comic, I'd say for free, but since they charge $1 more, then you get it for $1, basically is how most people think of it. So, they, just a quick rehash, they're deciding to change that where you get a different back issue of a comic, and there's only 3 different ones each month, and it's really annoying, and you want to know more about it, just watch last week's video. So here's the thing, there was an announcement this week, but not from Marvel, from DC, and they have announced that on some of their select titles, they are going to actually start charging $3.99 for them. Remember, they were $2.99, but with that, you will get a digital version of the comic you're buying. So they have basically been like, well, people like this that Marvel was doing, and Marvel's going to stop doing it now, so we're going to start doing it now. So the comics world is a really, really weird industry, because stuff like that will happen all the time. It's really ridiculous. It's still not enough to get me to start buying DC Comics, though. Nothing against them, yeah. It's a rabbit hole I don't want to start down. And speaking of comics, this? Hey guys, Sean here. So last week I was talking a lot about comics, and at the beginning of this video I decided to do an update to what I was talking about last week, and then I was like, well, on my whiteboard of ideas, I've had comics written on there for a while, so let's talk about comics. I wanted to do a list of my 5 favorite comic series that are currently running that I am collecting. Now the thing is, I don't know if I'm going to do all 5 in this video, or if I will break them up and maybe do like 2 now and then 3 later, or 2, 2, and 1, or what have you. Because actually, number 1, there's a lot I can talk about it. However, because of something that happened today, I really want to talk about that one. So we will see what happens as I go through this. So depending on if this looks like it's going to be like 40 minutes worth of stuff, then I will just go ahead and do the number 1 on my list for this video. Sometimes I wonder if I should unplug the refrigerator when I'm doing this. Anyway, so if this goes way long, I will just do the number 1, and then later down the line I'll do the other 4 in a separate video. So let's see what happened right now. Alright, so since I can tell already that this is going to take a very long time, the only one I'm going to be talking about in this video is my number 1. So here's the weird thing about my number 1. In order to talk about it, I first have to talk about a comic that has absolutely nothing to do with Marvel Comics. In fact, it has nothing to do with print comics at all. You see, on the internet, there is a thing known as webcomics. Of course there is. There's everything on the internet. The majority of webcomics are basically like the comics that are in the daily newspaper, the simple 3-panel comics, and they will paste it on their website, like every day or 3 times a week, or some of them are just 2 times a week, or what have you. Some creators, though, get even more ambitious, and they will do full-on comic books. One of these creators is Christopher Hastings. He created a website and comic called Dr. McNinja, which is about an Irish ninja family, the oldest son of which decides that he doesn't want to be a ninja, he wants to be a doctor. So he goes off and becomes a doctor, but deep down he's still a ninja. I know this sounds completely ridiculous, but that's the point. It is completely ridiculous, and it is hilarious. So basically how it worked was Christopher Hastings would write and draw a page of this comic book, and he'd release, one on one day, and then a few days later he'd release the next page, and then a few days later the next page, and it continued like that. And then eventually, it would be a complete story, and he would cut it off, and then that would be it. That would be the first issue of that comic. It became hugely popular, and in fact, the first 11 issues of the comic were put into this. This is the Dr. McNinja Omnibus. To tell you what an omnibus is, first we gotta talk about trade paperbacks. Trade paperbacks are basically collections of single-issue comics that are put together in a book form, and then that's what is sold in like Barnes & Noble and stuff like that. So you get a collection of like the entire story of a comic book, but you don't get the individual issues. Omnibuses are generally like huge, fat books that have a bunch. Like I said, this is 11 issues of the comic, and as you can see, it is really thick. In fact, this basically covers August 3rd, 2004 to July 30th, 2008. Right here, actually, you can see this is the page that was put up on August 3rd, 2004. Basically, the first story is about a fast food restaurant chain known as McDonald's that is run by a clown who is named Donald McDonald. And they're trying to get the youth market, because the youth don't seem to like hamburgers as much. So they introduce something that they know that kids love, and they introduce the McNinja burger, because kids love ninjas. And this really upsets Dr. McNinja, because obviously, I mean, he's Dr. McNinja. He didn't give permission to use his name for this burger. So he ends up going to McDonald's headquarters to talk it out with Donald McDonald. It's really funny. It's, you know, it's great satire. It's great comic satire. It's just, it's such a great series, and it has been going for 13 years. Well, 12 and a half years, because it started in August of 2004 and it is now January of 2017. I don't exactly remember when I first discovered Dr. McNinja, but it was like 7 or 8 years ago when I first started reading it, and like I've read it every single week, and you know, 3 times a week that he has posted a page since I first discovered it. And I went back and read all of the issues before that, and it's just, it's possibly my most favorite comic that has ever been written, because it is just so funny and creative, and it's constantly, things are getting called back to from like way at the beginning, and just, it's just such a great connected story overall. And that's what actually brings me to today, January 19th, 2017. The very last page was posted today. He gave us a 13-month, you know, head start, so we knew that it was coming, and the last 2 stories were The End and The End Part 2. And the last page for The End Part 2 posted today. So Dr. McNinja is done, but it will live forever on the internet, and it is so great, and you should really check it out. I will put a link down to Dr. McNinja in the doobly-doo. But what does Dr. McNinja have to do with Marvel and my current favorite running series? Well, for that we have to talk about 2 very special Marvel characters. The first one is Deadpool. So here's the thing, depending on how this video is edited, I either have not talked about Deadpool yet because I only did the #1 comic on my list, or I already talked about him as the #2. So if I talked about him as the #2, you already saw all of that. You already know Deadpool, you know all of that. If I didn't talk about him in this video, I'll be talking about him in a few weeks. I will put a link to that video down in the doobly-doo, so you can click that when you're done watching this, once I have actually posted that one. Anyway, a quick breakdown. Deadpool, Merc with the Mouth. Ryan Reynolds played him in a movie that was hugely successful last year. #1 R-rated movie of all time. There will be plenty more Deadpool movies to come. Deadpool will be greatly known from this day forward. Now, the other character we have to talk about is Spider-Gwen. Oh, here's a picture of Spider-Gwen. So if you saw the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movies, Gwen Stacy was his love interest in those movies. Gwen Stacy was Spider-Man's original girlfriend. Well, Actually, if you want to get technical, Betsy Brandt was his original girlfriend in the comics, who was played by Elizabeth Banks in the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies. She was J. Jonah Jameson's secretary, but you know, that's not important right now. So Gwen Stacy was Peter Parker's college girlfriend, and she ended up getting killed by the Green Goblin in the 70s, and then he eventually ended up marrying Mary Jane and all that. So, but like a few years ago, they did a what if story where it was what if Gwen Stacy had been bitten by the radioactive spider and not Peter Parker, and she became Spider-Gwen is what she ended up becoming, and so that's kind of what this story was what if Gwen was the superpowered spider person and not Peter Parker. Well, this became like a huge thing when that came out, and as a result, for like 1 month, they did variant covers for all of the different comics that were Gwen versions of the character in that comic. Pretty much all of them are completely forgettable because nobody ever talks about the rest of them, except for one. You see, at the time, the Secret Wars was going on, which was a big crossover event in the Marvel universe that was shaking everything up. And Deadpool had his own Secret Wars book called this Deadpool's Secret Wars, because he breaks the fourth wall and does jokes all the time, and that's his shtick. And so Deadpool's Secret Wars #2 had a variant cover. It came out June 17th, 2015, and it looked like this, where it was Gwenpool. This single drawing was so hugely successful that they were like, we should turn this into something. So this is what they decided to do. In the 80s, there was a movie based on a comic book character that was produced by George Lucas called Howard the Duck. It was a massive bomb, and Howard the Duck kind of went away for a while. He had a bit of a little resurgence in the 90s when they gave him his own short-run comic book. It's actually kind of funny because so the thing with Howard the Duck is that, you know, he's a duck that wears a suit, no pants. Sounds kind of familiar, right? Well, Disney actually sued Marvel when they first originally released Howard the Duck because he looked so much like Donald. And I believe Marvel ended up winning that case. I can't remember exactly what happened, but the original writer and creator of Howard the Duck in the 90s, they brought him back to do the 90s run of Howard the Duck, and during that run, for like 3 issues, he actually had a spell put on him that made him look like a giant talking mouse. So that was kind of like a sticking it to Disney. And then eventually Disney won because they ended up buying out Marvel. So mouse always wins. But at the end of Guardians of the Galaxy, after all of the credits and everything, there was a quick little cameo by Howard the Duck, and it got his popularity back up a little bit. And so on November 4th, 2015, they premiered a new Howard the Duck series with Howard the Duck #1. And so it was decided in the back of this comic there would be a Gwenpool story. For the first time, there would be a full-fledged, well, not full-fledged, a half-fledged Gwenpool story. And so for the next 3 issues of Howard the Duck, they would tell this Gwenpool story. And depending on how well it did, they would then decide if they would give Gwenpool her own series. But Gwenpool was kind of like this kooky, bizarre idea of a comic, so who would they get to do like this kooky, crazy character? Well, who else? They got Christopher Hastings, the writer and creator of Dr. McNinja. Well, and artist too, although eventually he did have people help out with inking and eventually coloring Dr. McNinja, but he did still draw it all the way up to the end. And so they released a special issue on December 9th, 2015 called Gwenpool's Holiday Special. And that was just kind of a collection of little vignette stories starring various characters in the Marvel Universe and Gwenpool overall. And then finally, on April 13th, 2016, Gwenpool #1 came out. So what is the deal with Gwenpool? People look at her and they're like, so what? She's just Gwen Stacy, but as Deadpool? No, not exactly. That's what everyone assumes, but it's not even really that. Well, so here's the deal. We don't know yet exactly what happened, but here is the basic gist. She is a girl named Gwendolyn Poole who used to live in our universe, the real world. And she was a huge Marvel comic book fan. And one day she ended up waking up in the Marvel universe. We don't know how that happened yet because it hasn't been written in the book yet, but it's supposed to be explained sometime in the next few months. So that's going to be really exciting when that happens. So essentially her only superpower is the fact that she knows everything about the Marvel universe. She knows the secret identities of every character. She knows all of their strengths. She knows all of their weaknesses. She knows everything about all of them. And most importantly, she knows she's living in a comic book world. So she knows how comic books work. She knows that the extra characters don't really mean anything because they don't show up ever again. It's only the superheroes that matter, or the people that are associated with the superheroes. However, since she is actually living in that world, it has started to really affect her. And it is a really interesting story, but it is also hilarious at the same time. Because it's written by Christopher Hastings, and he's really good at that. He's really good at writing really cohesive, really great stories that are just so hilarious. And so the sadness that I feel that Dr. McNinja has ended and will be no more is lessened by the fact that Christopher Hastings' style lives on in Gwenpool. As I said last week, where I was talking about the problems I'm having with Marvel's new digital comics initiative, that I would probably have to stop buying comics to send a point. I don't think I can stop buying Gwenpool because of how much I love it. So if anything, I will just be buying Gwenpool and probably the 4 other comics that I either talked about or will be talking about. But that is that. It has been like an hour and 17 minutes since I started talking, so I'm going to end it here. Eventually I'll get into the story of how I originally got into comics and why I stopped collecting comics and then why I keep going back and stopping and all that stuff. So just comics in general. But I just wanted to do a video about my current running favorite comics, or 2 videos. So if you liked this video, go ahead and press the like button. If you'd like to see more of what I do here in this crazy, kooky, I don't know what this channel is yet, but keep posting stuff anyway, go ahead and hit the subscribe button at the end of the video. If you want to see the previous video, go ahead and click the previous video end screen button at the end. And if you want to see what my current video that I just released is, that will be at the end as well. So if you're watching this video, say 6 months from now, you will see what my most recent video is. And if you feel like supporting this channel in any way, you can go ahead and click on the Patreon button at the end of the video and head to my Patreon and check out what I've got there. And with that, have a good however long it is until you watch my next video.